The space dock had seen strange visitors before, but nothing felt as intense as the moment the cargo ship arrived. People on the maintenance deck were going about their normal work when a heavy warning tone echoed through the walls. A large vessel, shaped like a crescent claw and glowing with faint orange patterns, requested an emergency landing. At first, everyone thought it was just another overheating engine or a damaged cargo bay. But when the ship touched down, the sound that came out of it made every worker freeze. It wasn't metal grinding. It wasn't an alarm. It was crying. The sound was sharp, high, and desperate, like several small creatures calling for help. The doors of the ship opened slowly, releasing a wave of heat that rolled across the deck. Out of the doorway stepped a massive reptilian figure, her scales a deep silver green, carrying a trembling energy that felt ancient and powerful. She looked like a dragon from old stories, towering, winged, with eyes that glowed like molten gold. But the strength in her presence was overshadowed by something softer, something painful. She kept turning her head back toward the ship, letting out low, worried rumbles. Everyone realized immediately that she was a mother. Her hatchlings were inside, and they were crying so loudly it echoed throughout the whole dock. Crew members stopped what they were doing and stared. Some were frightened, some curious, but all of them sensed the urgency. The dragon mother paced and flicked her tail in distress, releasing bursts of heated breath that shimmered in the air. The workers had seen reptilian alien visitors before, but never a mother in panic, and especially not one this large. Station medics rushed forward, trying to help. They carried scanners, pads, and small protective shields. They tried talking to her in calm voices, repeating the few translated phrases they knew. But she didn't calm down. Her claws scraped lightly against the floor, not in anger but in fear, a helpless fear only a parent could feel. She kept looking inside the ship as if the walls themselves were hurting her children. The medics tried stepping inside, but the temperature was too high. The ship's incubator systems were failing, and without them, the environment inside grew unstable. Each moment made the hatchlings cry harder, their tiny voices rising like alarms. The scientists checked sensors and heat patterns, but they couldn't understand why the babies were panicking so much. They only knew the situation was getting worse. The dragon mother moved restlessly, her large wings trembling. The deck workers could feel pulses of heat radiating from her every time she grew more desperate. Her emotional distress was affecting the ship's internal systems, causing them to flicker and spark. A few guards stepped forward cautiously, worried the heat might grow dangerous. But there was no anger in her movements, only a mother begging the universe to help her children. In the corner of the deck, a human mechanic was working on a damaged loading drone when he heard the strange crying. At first, he assumed it was some malfunctioning alarm, but when he looked up, he saw the worried crowd forming and the massive figure pacing near the ship. He wiped his hands, set down his tools, and slowly walked toward the scene. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the sound of those hatchlings struck something in him. The cries weren't frightening. They were sad, the kind of sad that made his chest tighten. He had heard babies cry before, and even though these cries were sharper and alien, they still had that same helpless tone. Something was wrong, and every instinct told him that whatever was happening inside that ship needed attention fast. He stood a bit behind the medics, listening carefully. While everyone else focused on the dragon mother's size or heat or movement, he was trying to understand the rhythm of the crying. There was a pattern in the way the hatchlings called out, rising sharply every time the ship gave a small stutter or vibration. The mechanic frowned. That wasn't random. He looked at the ship's exterior panels. They pulsed with struggling power. Every spark, every weak hum in the metal, was followed by louder cries from the hatchlings. He leaned his head slightly, listening again. The crying wasn't just emotional. It was reacting to something. while others talked about temperature, medical scans, and alien biology. He noticed something much simpler, something familiar to anyone who had ever worked around engines for years. Engines had tones, vibrations, rhythms. You could tell when something was stable or unstable by the way it hummed. And the incubator system inside this ship was humming wrong. Like a machine gasping for air. He approached the medics carefully and asked if he could get a closer look. They hesitated, since he wasn't part of the medical team. But the Dragon Mother turned her head toward him with a sudden sharp focus. She sniffed the air, as if sensing something different about him. She didn't roar or push him back. She only watched. The mechanic took that as permission. He slowly stepped toward the ship's entrance. The heat inside was strong, but he had dealt with overheated engines plenty of times. He shielded his face and kept going. The light inside flickered like fire behind mist. He could hear the hatchlings clearly, now small bodies, tiny claws, trembling breaths. They were huddled together, all crying, all confused, all scared. And right beside them sat the incubator unit, the machine meant to keep them warm and calm. But the system was flickering, the power output stumbling in uneven bursts. The uneven vibrations must have been startling the babies, like a cradle shaking in the wrong rhythm. Every time the machine stuttered, the babies cried harder. The mechanic crouched beside the incubator. He didn't touch it yet. Instead, he listened and felt the metal beneath his fingers. The vibration was wrong, trembling in short, broken pulses. He had felt something like this in old cargo ships, when a stabilizer coil was out of sync or a power regulator was failing. It wasn't dangerous, but it was stressful to anything, sensitive to rhythm, and these hatchlings were extremely sensitive. He looked back toward the entrance. The Dragon Mother stood there, her large head lowered, her eyes full of fear and hope. She didn't move, not wanting to frighten her babies more. Instead, she waited, watching the human who seemed to be the only one paying attention to the machine instead of her. He turned back to the incubator and inspected the control panel. The readings were jumping all over the place, showing signs of an unstable frequency. He murmured something under his breath, a habit he always had while working, but his voice was calm and steady. Even that seemed to soften the hatchlings a little. They still cried, but their eyes widened, their breath slowing just a bit. He realized something important in that moment. These babies weren't just reacting to heat or fear. They needed a steady vibration, a calming low-frequency hum, something that reminded them of their nesting chambers on their homeworld. Their species relied on gentle resonance to soothe their young, almost like a lullaby made of vibration instead of sound. And right now, the machine that was supposed to give them that comfort was doing the opposite. The mechanic took a slow breath. He knew he couldn't fix the entire system immediately, but he could stabilize it long enough to help. He pulled a small multi-tool from his belt, checked the failing circuit, and began adjusting the connections. Sweat dripped down his face from the heat, but he stayed focused. Every time he made a correction, the vibration changed slightly, and the hatchlings reacted. Their cries dipped, then rose, then dipped again. He whispered softly, trying to keep his tone steady, talking to them the way he would talk to a scared animal. He knew they didn't understand his words, but maybe they could understand the calm in his voice. He kept working, careful, patient, hoping he could stabilize the machine enough to help the little ones feel safe again. Outside the ship, everyone watched, holding their breath. The Dragon Mother remained still, her tail wrapped around her feet, her wings lowered in anxious silence. And inside, for the first time since the ship had arrived, the hatchlings' cries slowly began to change from sharp panic to uncertain. Trembling WHIMPERS. It wasn't peace yet, but it was the beginning. The mechanic stayed beside the incubator, trying to keep the vibrations steady, but he knew the machine wouldn't hold for long. The system was too damaged. Every time he tightened one part, another part flickered. The hatchlings were calming a little, but their tiny chests still rose and fell too quickly, their bodies quivering from fear and confusion. They needed real comfort, not just a temporary fix. Outside the ship, people waited nervously. They whispered to each other, wondering if the human inside could actually help, or if things would suddenly get worse. The Dragon Mother didn't join their whispers. She just stared at the entrance, her huge eyes glowing with worry. Every now and then she let out a low, trembling sound, something between a breath and a prayer. She wanted to rush in, gather her babies in her wings, and protect them from whatever was hurting them. But she knew she couldn't. Her body heat alone could make the fragile environment inside collapse. The mechanic worked slowly, careful not to cause a sudden spark. He watched the small hatchlings as he adjusted the machine. Their bodies were covered in tiny scales, soft and glossy, glowing faintly with warm color. Every time they stopped crying for a moment, they pressed their little heads together for comfort. But when the incubator gave even the smallest shudder, their cries rose again. He leaned back on his heels and wiped his forehead. The problem wasn't just broken parts. The whole pattern of vibration was unstable. The machine wasn't providing the steady, soft hum these little creatures needed. Their species had evolved in deep, warm caves where the ground itself hummed naturally. These babies were born in space instead, far from the familiar resonance of their home. And now the machine that was supposed to replace that natural comfort was failing. No wonder they were terrified. He stood up slowly and walked toward the ship entrance, blinking against the bright light outside. Everyone turned toward him the moment he appeared. The Dragon Mother lifted her head sharply, her claws scraping gently against the floor as if she was bracing herself for bad news. He held up his hands calmly. He didn't want to scare anyone. He didn't even know how to explain everything in the technical language the scientists usually used. He only knew what he had observed, what he had heard, what he had felt through the metal of the machine. The medics stepped toward him first. One asked if the hatchlings were sick. Another asked if the heat was too dangerous. But the mechanic shook his head. He wasn't sure how to put it into words without confusing them more. So he kept it simple. The babies aren't crying because they're sick, he said slowly. They're scared. The machine that's supposed to soothe them is sending the wrong vibrations. They're reacting to the noise and the unstable rhythm. The group looked confused. They were experts in biology, not engines. They understood temperature, nutrition, stress signs, but energy vibration. Patterns were not their area. One of them asked if fixing the machine would solve everything. I tried fixing it, he replied, shaking his head gently. It's too damaged. I can stabilize it for a few minutes at a time, but it won't last. They need something steady, something soft, something that feels like home. Everyone grew quiet. The Dragon Mother crouched slightly, listening. When the mechanic mentioned home, she let out a deep, soft rumble that vibrated the floor. It wasn't a threat. It was agreement. She knew exactly what her children were missing. The mechanic walked slowly toward her. She didn't move away. Her eyes followed him closely, glowing with a mix of fear and curiosity. He stopped a few feet from her, feeling the immense warmth she radiated. You've been trying to comfort them, he said gently, speaking as if she could understand every word. But your body heat is too strong for the ship's systems. If you go inside, it will get worse. The Dragon Mother lowered her head until her snout was almost level with him. Her breath rolled out like warm mist across his shoulders. She blinked slowly, as if telling him she knew that already. Her frustration came from the fact that she couldn't help her babies the way she wanted to. The mechanic looked back at the ship, then at the workers, then at the mother. Something inside him clicked. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was experience. Maybe it was just human stubbornness. But he felt certain now he understood something the others did not. The babies weren't responding to voices or scanners. They were responding to the energy around them. They needed something steady, something gentle, something alive. He turned back to the mother and placed his hand over his chest, pointing to himself. "I want to try something different," he said quietly, "but I need your permission." It felt strange asking a towering alien for permission, but he didn't think twice. She was a mother. These were her children. She deserved the choice. She leaned forward, her huge eyes studying his face. Then she slowly nodded, not with a human motion, but with a deep lowering of her head, her horns angling down. It was a clear sign of trust. The mechanic walked back toward the ship, his step steady. The medics looked uncertain, but no one stopped him. They didn't have any better ideas. Inside the ship again, he knelt beside the hatchlings. They blinked up at him through watery eyes, their tiny bodies curled into each other. Now that he was closer, he felt something he hadn't noticed before, a faint tremble coming from their chests. Almost like they were trying to create their own comforting vibration, but couldn't. He looked at the incubator again. He couldn't rely on that machine. It might collapse at any moment. So he shut it off fully, knowing the heat in the room would be enough to keep them warm for a short while. The hatchlings cried again when the machine went silent, confused by the sudden change. Their tiny claws reached out, scraping the floor. The mechanic took a slow breath. Then he placed his hands gently on the warm metal floor, close to the babies, but not touching them. He needed a steady vibration. Something natural. Something he could control. He closed his eyes and started tapping the metal lightly with his fingers, not random tapping, but a slow, repeating pattern. A heartbeat rhythm. Soft, predictable, calm. The sound was gentle, but deep enough to travel through the floor. A low, steady vibration, simple and warm. The kind of rhythm anyone could recognize as safety. The hatchlings hesitated. Their cries softened, turning into confused chirps. One of them crawled a little closer, curling near his hand. Another lowered its head onto the metal, listening. Slowly, the trembling in their bodies decreased. He kept tapping. He didn't rush. He didn't change the rhythm. He let it remain steady, like a lullaby made of touch instead of words. Outside, the mother lifted her head slightly, hearing something different. Then she leaned closer to the entrance and gave a gentle exhale, sensing the shift in her baby's voices. The mechanic continued tapping until the hatchlings' cries faded into tiny, quiet sounds. They weren't asleep yet, but they were calmer than before. Their breathing slowed. Their bodies relaxed. A soft glow spread across their scales as they pressed together more comfortably. The mechanic smiled a little. It wasn't a big solution, but it was a start. A sign that he could help them understand the feeling of safety again. He kept tapping softly, watching the babies listen. And for the first time since the ship had arrived, the dock outside grew silent, not from fear, but from hope. The mechanic stayed inside the ship longer than anyone expected. His quiet tapping continued in the same gentle rhythm, the kind that echoed softly through the warm floor. The hatchlings were responding well. Their breathing had slowed, their cries had faded, and their little bodies were no longer shaking with fear. They curled close to one another, listening to the vibrations he created with his hands. He didn't rush anything. He didn't move too quickly. He just kept the pattern alive, letting the young creatures understand that the world around them wasn't falling apart. The soft tapping wasn't loud, but in the silence of the ship, it felt like a quiet promise. The babies seemed to sense that dot outside. The workers waited, trying not to crowd the doorway. The dragon mother stood tall, but still, her eyes fixed on the entrance. Her tail lay curled around her feet now, a sign that her panic had eased just a little. But she couldn't relax completely. until she heard silence from inside, not the frightened silence of holding their breath, but the peaceful silence of calm. When the mechanic finally stopped tapping to rest his hands, the hatchlings chirped in soft protest. He smiled faintly and whispered reassuring sounds, not words, just gentle noises to let them know he was still there. It was strange how natural this felt. He'd never cared for alien babies before, but the instinct came easily, like caring for any frightened young creature. He looked at the broken incubator again. The machine couldn't stay off forever. The room was warm now, but the heat would slowly drop. He needed something better than finger tapping. Something steady that wouldn't depend on him being present every minute. His mind suddenly jumped to something he always carried around, a small repair drone he used for difficult tasks. It wasn't big, but it had a smooth motor inside, one that could produce a stable vibration if he adjusted it properly. The drone was lying on the deck outside because he set it down when he hurried in. Maybe it could help. He got up slowly, making sure not to startle the hatchlings. They raised their heads and made soft sounds when he moved away. He gently touched the floor again with his palm, giving a few calm taps, letting them feel his presence before stepping out. Outside, he saw the dragon mother watching him with intense focus. She leaned forward when he appeared, her wings shifting softly. He walked past her without any sudden movements, heading straight to his small repair kit by the wall. He picked up the drone, a round, palm-sized device with adjustable parts, and checked the motor. The workers nearby looked confused. One of them asked what he planned to do. The mechanic replied in simple words, trying not to sound too technical. "The babies need steady vibration," he said. "I think I can make this drone create the same rhythm they like." A few people raised eyebrows. It wasn't an idea anyone expected, but no one had a better one. He sat on the floor and opened the drone's side panel. The dragon mother bent her huge neck to watch. Her glowing eyes followed every motion, as if she hoped the tiny machine in his hands might somehow save her children. Her breath rolled out warm against his shoulders, but she stayed as still as she could. The mechanic removed the drone's movement sensors and adjusted the motor. He didn't need the drone to fly or scan or repair anything. He just needed it to hum a soft, steady, comforting hum that would feel warm and continuous. Something like a heartbeat made of energy. He tested the motor by letting it run. The sound was too sharp at first, too fast. The hatchlings inside the ship heard it and let out small nervous chirps. He quickly shut it off. The dragon mother tensed, but he lifted his hand gently as if saying, "It's okay, I'll fix it." He adjusted the settings again, slowing the motor, softening the vibration, changing the frequency. He tested it a second time. This time the sound was deeper. Not loud, but warm. A soft hum that felt like a pulse. Even the workers nearby fell silent when they heard it. The dragon mother leaned close to the little drone, blinking slowly. Something in the sound touched her deeply. It reminded her of the winds in the caves of her homeworld, the low notes the rocks made when the planet shifted gently. It was faint, but the memory was there. The mechanic didn't know that, but he sensed he was getting closer. He turned the drone off again, made a few more adjustments, then tested it one last time. This time the vibration was perfect slow. Steady, calm. Inside the ship, the hatchlings reacted instantly. They made tiny chirping sounds, but not frightened ones. It was the same sound they made when listening to his tapping earlier. Curious, soft, hopeful. The mechanic stood up holding the drone. He walked back toward the ship's entrance, and the mother followed him closely, her tail brushing lightly across the floor. Once inside, the warm air wrapped around him again. The hatchlings were still huddled together, their small eyes glowing faintly. When they saw him return, they let out tiny sounds, almost like relief. He knelt down and placed the drone gently on the floor near them. Then he turned it on. The soft hum filled the room, spreading through the metal floor and the warm air. The vibration soothed everything it touched. The hatchlings froze for a moment, listening closely. Their glowing eyes widened. Then, one by one, they crawled closer to the drone and curled around its warmth. Their tiny claws relaxed. Their breathing slowed even more. Within moments, their bodies sank into a peaceful stillness. They weren't just calming, they were settling. They were finally feeling safe. The mechanic watched quietly, barely breathing. The drone's hum continued in the same gentle rhythm. The hatchlings rested their heads on the floor, their tiny wings folded neatly, their scales shimmering with a soft glow that only appeared when they felt secure. The dragon mother's reaction came slowly at first. She stepped inside the ship with careful movements, afraid of disturbing the moment. Her huge body stayed near the entrance, respecting the fragile environment. But when she heard the quiet breathing of her children, something in her entire posture changed. She lowered her massive head until it almost touched the floor. A soft sound escaped her chest, a deep, emotional rumble that filled the ship like warm wind. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. Her eyes shimmered, and she blinked slowly, almost as if she were crying in her own silent way. The mechanic didn't move. He stayed beside the drone, making sure everything ran smoothly. He watched the dragon mother's expression, and seeing her calm made him feel something unexpected, something warm in his chest. He didn't know her language. He didn't know her world, but he understood her right now. She trusted him. She trusted him with her babies. The workers outside saw her bend her head toward the mechanic. She didn't roar. She didn't breathe heat. Instead, she gently tapped the floor in front of him with one large claw. It was a gesture none of the humans had seen before. But even without a translator, it was clear this was a sign of respect, maybe even gratitude. The mechanic nodded softly, almost shyly. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. He just wanted to fix things. That was his job. But today, he wasn't fixing a machine. He was fixing fear. He adjusted the drone one last time to make sure the hum stayed steady. The hatchlings didn't even twitch. They were already drifting into sleep, tiny breaths soft and warm, their bodies curled safely around the new source of comfort. The mechanic sat beside them for a while, watching the peaceful scene. The ship, once filled with panicked cries, now felt like a quiet nursery. The dragon mother stayed at the entrance, her eyes half closed, finally able to rest even if she didn't sleep. For the first time since arriving at the space dock, the atmosphere around them shifted completely. The fear had lifted. The panic had faded. Something new took its place, a calmness that filled every corner of the room. The mechanic looked at the sleeping hatchlings, then at the soft hum of the drone. It wasn't the grand design of some advanced scientist or a special alien machine. It was something simple, something made by hand, built with care and understanding. And it worked. The drone kept humming in its soft, steady rhythm, and the hatchlings slept so peacefully that it almost didn't feel real. Their tiny bodies rose and fell gently, their little wings folded neatly at their sides. The glow on their scales had shifted into a warm, healthy color. Anyone could look at them now and see the difference. These weren't frightened newborns anymore. They were calm, secure, and resting the way they were meant to. The mechanic didn't leave their side right away. He stayed sitting on the floor, leaning slightly against a metal beam, not wanting to disturb even a breath of the gentle atmosphere inside the ship. It was strange how attached he felt to these young creatures after only a short time. But their fear had been so raw, so real, that helping them didn't feel like a job anymore. It felt like something he was meant to do. He watched the drone carefully to make sure the vibration didn't change. Even a slight shift in rhythm might wake the hatchlings, and after everything they'd been through, they deserved this quiet moment. He placed his hand near the drone, feeling the soft hum travel through the metal floor. It reminded him of listening to engines during long space flights when he was younger. The steady sound always made him feel calm. Maybe that was why he understood the hatchlings' needs so quickly. He knew what it meant to find comfort in the hum of something steady. Outside the ship, the workers were cautious. They kept checking the temperature monitors, the pressure levels, and everything else that might affect the delicate environment inside. No one dared to speak too loudly. They didn't want to interrupt the peace the mechanic had created. The Dragon Mother stood right at the entrance, watching with intense focus. Her huge eyes didn't leave her babies for even a second. She lowered her head enough to see them clearly, but kept her body steady and still, careful not to disturb anything. Every breath she released came out slow and controlled, almost as if she was trying not to blow too much warm air into the room. When she saw the hatchlings sleeping so deeply, a wave of emotion washed across her face. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost gentle. Her wings folded in closer to her sides. The tension in her shoulders softened. The deep, worried lines on her face eased. She looked like a mother who had finally been given back her peace after hours of fear. The mechanic noticed her expression and felt a strange warmth in his chest. He wasn't used to receiving emotions from someone so different from him, but at this moment, their worlds didn't feel far apart at all. He gave her a small nod, a silent message that everything was all right now. She blinked slowly in return, as if to acknowledge the bond forming between them. He turned back to the babies. The tiniest one shifted slightly in its sleep, pressing closer to the drone. Its tiny claws curled and relaxed. The mechanic smiled softly. It was incredible how such a small creature could cause the entire station to worry so much. One of the workers whispered to another outside the ship, asking if the mechanic would stay there all day. Another whispered back that they didn't think he planned to leave anytime soon. The atmosphere around them felt almost sacred. No one wanted to break it. The mechanic gently adjusted the drone's placement so the vibrations spread evenly around the hatchlings. As he moved it an inch to the side, the smallest hatchling's ear flicked lightly. He paused and waited. When the little creature didn't wake, he let out a quiet breath of relief. He didn't want to undo all the calm he had worked so hard to create. He stayed there for a long time. Minutes turned into an hour. The ship's lights softened into a warm glow as the dock workers dimmed the overhead brightness outside, wanting to make the environment more comforting. The Dragon Mother didn't move, except to lower her head a little more, so she could watch her children from a better angle. Once in a while, she made a soft sound, something deep and gentle, almost like a lullaby in her own language. The hatchlings didn't wake, but their bodies seemed to relax even more when she did it. The mechanic felt a calmness he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't usually the type to sit still for this long. He liked working with his hands, fixing things, moving from project to project. But this moment didn't feel like waiting. It felt meaningful, like he was holding a fragile piece in his hands. Eventually, one of the medics stepped inside quietly and whispered to him, asking how long the drone would last. The mechanic whispered back that he had set it to run for hours without overheating. It was a strong device, even though it was small. But he added that he planned to build a better version, soon, something more stable, something made specifically for these hatchlings. The medic nodded and stepped back, impressed. It was rare to see someone so willing to go beyond their job, especially for a problem no one else knew how to approach. The mother shifted slightly when the medic moved, her eyes narrowing protectively. But when she saw the mechanic raise a calming hand, she relaxed again. She trusted him enough to let others approach as long as he was there. After a while, The mechanic finally stretched his back a little. He was stiff from sitting in the same position for so long. The drone hummed consistently, almost like it was singing the babies to sleep. The hatchlings were still curled tightly around each other, their tails wrapped together in a way that showed both comfort and instinct. He wondered what their homeworld sounded like. What kind of natural vibrations filled the caves where their species raised their young? He didn't need a translator to understand that the drone's soft hum was a shadow of something they missed. But even that small imitation was enough to help them breathe easier. The dragon mother took a small step inside the ship, her claws touching the metal lightly. The mechanic turned to her and raised his hand in a gentle gesture, letting her know it was all right. She lowered her head even more until her large snout was only a few inches from the hatchlings. She didn't touch them. She knew they were too sensitive, but her voice rumbled softly in her chest. The mechanic felt the vibration from her voice through the floor. It was deep and calming, like the sound of distant thunder. The hatchlings shifted in their sleep, reacting to the familiar tone. They didn't wake up, but their bodies pressed a little closer together. Seeing this, the mechanic felt something stir inside him. He realized the mother wasn't trying to replace the drone's sound. She was simply adding her own presence to it, letting her babies know she was there. It was a perfect combination, her natural resonance and the drone's steady hum working together. One of the workers outside whispered that it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen at the dock. They weren't wrong. This moment felt tender, even though it involved a creature taller than a transport truck and babies who had nearly shaken the station with their cries earlier. The mechanic finally stood up slowly, stretching his hands and fingers. The drone continued humming without needing him. He watched the babies one more time, making sure the vibration was stable. It was. Everything was working exactly as it should. The mother looked at him and tilted her head, as if asking what he planned to do next. He pointed gently at the drone and then at the hatchlings, trying to show her that the device would keep them calm. She blinked slowly. Understanding that, she moved her head closer to him, stopping just a breath away. It wasn't threatening. It was a gesture of closeness, a sign of trust. He could feel the warm air she breathed. Then she touched the floor lightly with her claw again, repeating the same respectful gesture from earlier. He nodded, touched by her silent gratitude. He didn't need words to understand her. The hatchlings slept on, peaceful and safe. The drone hummed softly, a quiet guardian in the middle of the room. The mother stood watch, her heart finally calm. And the mechanic knew this moment would stay with him forever. The morning after the hatchlings finally slept, the space dock felt different. Usually the repair bay buzzed with noise, people shouting instructions, engines rattling, machines beeping, and ships landing or leaving every few minutes. But today, many workers walked more softly than usual, as if they did not want to disturb the peaceful silence that had returned after a full day of chaos. The strange sound of the crying hatchlings was gone. Instead, there was a gentle quiet in the air, almost calming. The human mechanic, who had helped soothe the little creatures the night before, walked into the main corridor holding a small box of tools. It was supposed to be a normal day for him. He expected someone to grab him for a repair job, or call him to fix another machine that had suddenly decided to stop working. But instead, as he entered the bay, several workers turned to look at him. Some smiled, some nodded, a few even clapped softly. He froze, confused. No one ever reacted like this over a simple repair. He whispered under his breath, almost embarrassed. He had no idea that everyone already knew what happened. Word had spread faster than he could imagine. The alien Dragon Mother's ship crew had talked about it nonstop all night. Workers who saw the moment shared it with others in the station cafeteria. Even the security team, who rarely cared about anything outside their patrol routes, had been caught repeating the story. People kept saying things like, the human who calmed dragon hatchlings, and the mechanic who solved the impossible. The mechanic didn't know how to respond. He was just doing what seemed right. He never expected attention. He didn't seek it. He only cared that the mother and her babies were safe. As he walked toward the docking bay where the alien ship was stored, he felt a strange mixture of pride and nervousness. He hoped the hatchlings had slept well. He hoped the device he built had kept working through the night. And he hoped the mother, who had looked exhausted and desperate before, had finally found some peace. When he reached the entrance, 2 members of the alien crew stood waiting for him. They weren't as large as the dragon mother, but their presence still felt powerful. They had scales along their arms and tall curved horns on their heads, though far smaller than the mother's. They stepped aside respectfully, allowing him to enter the ship. He wasn't expecting that. No alien crew had ever treated him with such care before. As he walked inside, the temperature changed to a warm, humid air that the reptilian species preferred. The floor felt slightly softer, made from a material that reacted to body heat. Every detail of the ship reminded him that this culture was nothing like humanity's. The mother was waiting for him in the main hall. She stood tall, her wings folded neatly behind her back, her massive tail resting gently along the ground. Her eyes looked different from the night before. Instead of being wide with fear, worry, and exhaustion, they looked calm, grateful, almost warmed out. Behind her, the hatchlings slept again in a cluster of soft blankets. The vibration emitter he built last night hummed quietly, doing its job perfectly. Every time a tiny hatchling twitched or shifted in its sleep, the hum adjusted slightly, offering exactly the comfort they needed. It was working better than he had hoped. The mother lowered her head toward him, not as a threat, but as a respectful greeting. She made a low sound, soft and steady. He had no idea what that sound meant in her language, but he could tell it wasn't anger or fear. It was something kind. One of the crew members stepped forward with a translation device. She says she is grateful, the translator explained. She says she has no words strong enough to thank you. The mechanic blinked, unsure what to say. His voice came out quiet. I'm just glad they're okay, he said. That's all that matters. The mother watched him for a moment, then slowly extended one of her large hands. In it, she held a small metal band with intricate carvings. The crew member spoke again. She wishes to offer you a title from her people. It is not given to outsiders. It is rarely given at all. But after what you did for her and her children, she calls you a nest ally. The mechanic felt his breath leave his chest. He knew, from bits of information here and there, that this species placed immense value on their families. A nest ally was someone who was trusted deeply, someone welcomed into the protective circle around the young. It was a bond formed only after great acts of kindness or bravery. He had never imagined he would be considered for something like that. The mother stepped closer, moving slowly so she wouldn't frighten him. She gently touched the metal band against his chest. Even that tiny gesture felt powerful, like being acknowledged by something ancient and wise. He accepted the band with both hands. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded with respect. After that, one of the crew asked him if he could show them how the device worked. They wanted to learn everything, how he put the parts together, why he chose certain wires, how the frequencies matched the hatchling's instincts. They took notes, studied the emitter, asked questions, and even recorded a hologram of the internal layout of the machine. What surprised him most was how seriously they treated his explanation. They listened carefully, almost like students learning from a teacher. He realized that, for them, this wasn't just a device. It was something that could help hundreds of families across their colonies. The idea made him smile softly. A few hours later, when it was time for the alien ship to leave, many station workers gathered near the docking platform. Everyone wanted to see the hatchlings one more time, even if only from a distance. The mother carried the sleeping hatchlings in a special cradle. They looked peaceful, like they were floating on a wave of calm. Before boarding, the mother turned one last time to the mechanic. She made the same low sound again, the one filled with warmth. Then she placed her forehead gently against his, a gesture she had not done for anyone else. The translator didn't need to explain it. Everyone understood that it meant trust, gratitude, and a promise that the memory of this moment would last. The ship's engine started up, glowing a bright blue. The mechanic stepped back as the ship lifted upward, rising slowly until it disappeared into the star-filled darkness. When the ship was gone, the station felt strangely quiet. The mechanic stood there, holding the metal band in his hand, feeling like something important had happened, not just for the aliens, but for him too. It wasn't a heroic act in his mind. It was simple compassion mixed with the skills he used every day. Yet it had changed something. It had built a bridge between species that normally stayed apart. As he walked back to his workshop, several workers stopped him again to talk. They asked him what happened, how he figured out the problem, and what the hatchlings looked like up close. He answered each question patiently, though part of him still felt shy about all the attention. But deep down, he couldn't deny it felt good to help someone in such a meaningful way. By the end of the day, the story of the human mechanic who soothed alien dragon hatchlings had already started spreading to other stations. Some said he was a genius. Some said he was brave. Others simply said he cared when no one else knew what to do. He didn't think he was special, but he didn't argue. Sometimes small actions could change big things. Sometimes kindness could travel farther than anyone expected. That night, when he sat alone in his workshop, he placed the metal band on his desk. The carvings shimmered faintly under the light, almost glowing. He stared at it for a long time, thinking about the dragon mother's expression, the sound of the hatchlings finally quiet, and the warm gesture she offered before leaving. He knew this memory would stay with him forever. And somewhere far away, across the stars, a mother and her little hatchlings were safe and sleeping peacefully because of something he built with his own 2 hands. And even though he didn't seek recognition, a small smile appeared on his face. Sometimes, the universe noticed the quiet heroes too.